Hi, everybody. I am Christine. I'm here with Sonia and Bing Bong. Bing Bong is made out of modeling clay, and my kids just love it. And so he's joining our conversation today. So, welcome, Bing Bong.
Howdy. Okay, so we are welcoming you to Carline Catch Up, and today we are going to be investigating a question that came up right before we took a break for the holidays, right at the end of 2024. So today's topic question is how can it be more simple to be an informed and active citizen? Right before the new year of 2025, there was a continuing resolution, the omnibus continuing resolution, which I have seen on some websites now termed as COBRA, not to confuse it with the crazy, insane medical insurance costs that one pays when you leave a job. But anyway, and it was this huge piece of legislation that had multiple things packed onto it and was trying to get passed and stalled by the federal government right before they recessed for the year, before the year closed out. And there was a lot of passion from everyday citizens once it got out how big this was, how much stuff was in it, how dense, how many different topics and issues, and people wanted their voices heard. And, TikTok, there were just a couple of days left. So Christine and I were talking about like, how can people who aren't in Congress just better know about what's being proposed and how can we weigh in? Why is that not more often like a dedicated news segment? And it kind of made us roll back like, what did we learn about how you should participate in the government when you're in middle school and high school? And when I looked up, how to have your voice heard um, online, I just kind of Googled it one day. All that kept coming up were these middle school and high school civics videos on how a bill becomes a law. The same schoolhouse rock kind of approach to watching somebody on a horse kind of come through town and tell people, and then they carry the paper to get it signed, and then there's a petition, and you have this back in the day kind of view, but what about now? We're bigger, we're more diverse. There's a lot more states than there was at the time of Paul Revere. And so we were just really wondering, today's serious question is, at what point did we decide in our nation that it is too much trouble to inform the public and get their opinions? When did it become too much trouble to mail out the progress of state and federal laws? Because Christine and I were talking about like times where you remember things at the public library, or you would go into the post office too, and they'd have like local news or federal updates, and sometimes also pictures of wanted people. Um, but that's where like your town could go and you would all see that same information. So when did it become too much trouble for our government to involve us in our representation? So here's a quick overview from Google, because today's going to be another informative, more than a discussion kind of segment. Government public notices were created as a tool for keeping government actions transparent. In recent years, some government entities stopped posting public notices in newspapers and instead post them on their own websites or social media platforms. That struck a chord, and I realized that like I've been trying to go to different states' websites and learn how to navigate them in order to get information and develop some insights and some thoughts and opinions for myself. The US Supreme Court ruled that public officials may be held liable under the First Amendment if they block social media comments by the public. My original question was, when did we stop getting it out to everybody and feeling like it was worth it. So I didn't feel like that completely addressed it. So then I asked ChatGPT, and my husband helped me with a little bit of a grok search just to make sure we covered all sides here. And this is the history of how we got here. So back in colonial times, what Christine and I were talking about, yes, things were discussed and shared in town meetings and assemblies, which were relatively open. Um, and then post-revolution, the US Constitution actually established federal legislative process, including publication of laws and congressional proceedings. But this was limited to printed materials. Again, kind of what you see on those Schoolhouse Rock videos, newspapers and gazettes and things. And you're also limited by your literacy ability. But it was getting out in printed format. And the 19th century came, and Congress began publishing records of their debates and distributing them to libraries and the publics, and states adopted similar practices. So the federal government had rules, the states were kind of learning to catch up and do similar things. These were public meetings were still held, but the proposals and the feedback was still constrained by your ability to get to that localized place and your ability to read. 20th century comes along, we have the rise of mass media, life-changing and game-changing as people could sit around the radio and then eventually the television. Newspapers were even more widely circulated, and you could hear what was being dealt with, discussed in several different formats, but you could all gather around a source in your home or school, or, at least it wasn't just constrained to one town hall where something was tacked up on a door. So, it's now coming into our homes. Great. And then this led eventually to boom, 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 some legislation to help with that transparency. In 1935, something called the Federal Register became the official journal for publishing proposed and final federal regulations and executive orders and actions. Again, it's a federal document. And while it may be kind of posted or updated daily as a requirement, it only tells you what the final decisions were that were made, not what's being discussed so that you have time to weigh in. Okay, all right. In 1946, the Administrative Procedure Act required public notice and comment on proposed federal regulations. So now we're trying to be a little more proactive. Great. And there are tools now like government websites, but you have to know to go to something called regulations.gov, which I've never been to in my life, nor knew to go to before this point. And then you can track the progress of those regulatory proposals. Christine, you probably know about that through your research history, but I don't. In 1966, the Freedom of Information Act allowed citizens to request specific federal agency records to increase transparency and enablement of public access. Again, these are federal rules. Notice you haven't heard like what states have been adopting or requiring up until this point. So 1935. So we have colonial, post-colonial, then all the way to 1935, 1946, 1966, and then the Sunshine Act in 1976, requiring certain meetings to be open to the public, was kind of where we were with legislation and making it easier for the public to access, or just even helping the public access all of the public that the United States has grown to be. States, as I said, are not as clear. They've adopted their own transparency measures, and that includes online bill tracking systems, public comment opportunities, open legislative sessions. But in the great union here, practices vary widely by state, and they reflect different legal traditions and tech capacities. And this rolls all the way back to the beginning of Google's statement to say that some states have actually fought back, saying that it costs taxpayers in order for the state to buy airtime to let the public know or news like media space in the newspaper. And so there have been states that have been asking for and changing legislation saying we don't have to print in the newspaper anymore. We don't have to put it into a mass media market because that's actually costing the taxpayers money and it's better to save that money. I'm not right now arguing whether that is right or wrong, but I'm saying when did we all decide that? And is there possibly, is this a place where the disconnect is? The public is not informed in time. We get angry when we realize that we wanted our voices heard, but we didn't even know what was being done around us or to us. And we're doing this to save money. Lots of questions there. Christine, I know you had some additional things.
Yeah, so I want to dig into the states kind of a little bit more. So, 9 states considered legislation for this in 2023, basically allowing some or all notices to be published in newspapers, that were published in newspapers to be published on newspaper websites instead. And then 8 states, including 4 new ones, considered kind of similar legislation in 2024. Now, 3 recent bills have happened in Louisiana, Virginia, and North Dakota. But as Sonia pointed out, in a lot of these states, they've passed legislation on this and then actually overturned that legislation because of a lot of the backlash that they were facing from people. I want to put everybody that's listening onto this website. So it's called Public Notice Resource Center. That's Public Notice Resource Center. So on this website, they actually have a map that you can look at, and that map shows current legislation that's going on in every state. So if you are curious about what's actually going on in your particular state, if there's current legislation that's occurring on this issue, you can go to that website and actually check out whether there are and kind of what's going on. So, having said that, some of my questions really were, let's take the argument. Again, I'm not arguing for it or against it either, but let's consider the argument of why or how it can be detrimental. So, I live in Florida right now. Let's take Florida, for example. Florida has more than 4 million residents that are 65 or older. So in 2019, Nielsen Scarborough did a report, and it said that 14% of Florida's seniors didn't have internet access. So you're essentially saying if public notices were to be put online, 14% of Florida's seniors, just their seniors, are not going to have access to what's going on, which is a big concern. So it could be said that moving to a completely online notice could marginalize certain communities that don't have access to the internet. The other argument is print notices that were archived in libraries could be brought back up. Somebody could go and do research on that previous legislation or notices. Once it goes to online, how long is that being stored for? I don't know. I'm sure every state varies on how long they keep those records, but that could be a concern as well. So it's really a question of are we putting cost saving over being informed? How do we, and we've talked about this with other issues, how do we dance that delicate dance of incorporating technology as we should continue to advance as a society? How do we incorporate technology while still staying informed? So, Sonia, I don't know what some of your kind of key takeaways or key questions are, but those were some of my thoughts.
Yeah, I think adding to your examples, I'm a frugal person, so cost cutting sounds great as a tagline or a reason or a rationale. But when the foundation of your ability to represent yourself in your ideal government is your ability to weigh in on what you want to have happen, what you want to see happen, what you don't want to have happen, then foundationally being aware of it and having access and making that easier and easier and more the forefront of our discussions at the bus stop and the water cooler and the carpool line and the grocery store line is essential to any other measure on which we would spend money. We could spend money on a million other things, but how do we know what the public wants to spend money on if we haven't informed them? I just don't understand how we got this far with the individual states making this decision. And it really got me looking into when it started. And it seems like around 2021 was when it started. And I know Indiana was one of the first states or major states kind of mentioned in this movement to not have to place in newspapers, but use their own free government website and try to draw people there. And I read an article about which you guys can see that article in the links that we share um, about three key times that they're just three examples. I'm sure there are a lot more where it did cost taxpayers. So one was a man who had read in his newspaper that the local prison system, or I guess the state's prison system, was paying a particular vendor for some medications. And he went and researched, realized that those drugs were costing 4 times more than they should. And so then he was able to petition and rebid and win the contract, thereby saving the state money. So that seems to pay out when you made it public in the newspaper. He read it. He was able to catch an error and bring cost savings, but it took printing it in the newspaper. Another one was speaking about elderly people who like maybe can't keep up with the technology or don't have access to it or don't know when things change. They're not in the same circles to have somebody tell them, go here instead of there now. There was a woman who only learned that the bank was foreclosing on her house in a newspaper announcement. Most likely, she didn't have internet or wasn't checking email. She was somebody's grandma, or she didn't want to be scammed. She wasn't picking up the phone, or she didn't have a cell phone, whatever it was. The only way she knew and then was able to rally her family for some help was she would have lost everything on a stipulation, on somebody else's decision to not inform her in the way that she was used to being informed through this newspaper. And then there was a recent issue in Michigan. They were supposed to there was like an environmental law that was going to be passed, and Michigan was supposed to get public comment on it, and they had no public comment on it. And I think there was like 40 days or 45 days for the public to comment. And with 3 days left to go within this 45-day period, some local journalist did a story on the environmental policy. So not on asking for public comment, but just said, hey, did you guys know this thing is popping up and this is the way it's going to be voted on? Within 3 days, 80,000 people had something to say, and Michigan realized that not putting it in the newspaper themselves was a misstep for them. So, I feel like there is room here for discussing a lot of potential solutions. And, you and I never show up telling people exactly what to do, but we have more questions. Um, my first question is, who is working on this public information access issue for the public in a way that's making some progress? And is what is the root cause of this not being more important and more key when clearly we have a long-standing history? greatest in the world for making our citizens' voices heard and important and key, right? So again, how did we decide? And what is the root cause of the backpedaling on making sure public can get informed in multiple ways? I don't We're big, we're diverse, technology is ramping up, and so I don't think that only posting newspapers is the only way. I think we're going to have to hit it multiple ways. But let's figure out like who's working on it, how we can help, and what the real issues are that are involved so we know where to start and make progress on those multiple fronts. Um, like a random idea came to me. There are things that we get informed about all the time. I was just thinking about like mass media information sometimes comes through. And so how can we make like an opt-in? You get Amber Alerts on your phone. You get tornado warnings. There are things that are in place that are either by county or by state, that push in to our personal lives. Shouldn't shouldn't that be possible? At least maybe you can opt out of it if not. Or an opt-in. I don't know. But couldn't we have something like that for letting us know and keeping our finger on the pulse? Um, and then beyond that, backing it up a little bit and starting earlier, how can we infuse better habits in our children's education systems? In our places of work, everything from learning through workforce, so that we have more than the Schoolhouse Rocks video, so that we have more how a bill becomes a law. There's even like a posting that the White House put out that's also going to be part of our clips that was giving you guidance on how to comment, how to publicly comment if you want. And there's just so much that gets in the way. Some of the criticisms have been that the jargon is too technical. So when you read legislation, federal and state, it still says things like hitherto, where therefore, henceforth. If we're going to speak to the masses, we need to use language of the masses because it is confusing. It is very confusing. Um, There's the digital divides that Christine mentioned. And honestly, when the whole omnibus continuing resolution came up at the end of 2024, it became clear that just information overload is a problem too. The length of what is written, how long it takes to get to what the actual proposal is and to find it and to seek it out. And those are things that AI is going to be able to help us with. That's great. But we've lost a big chunk of time in there. And we want to make sure that more people have access to the narrowed down version and the full version and the narrowed down version, and that maybe they become one and the same. Um, I just don't know why it's necessary to have 50 pages of introduction to a regulation or a bill or a law to the point where you can't remember what you're reading anymore, if you're for it or against it. It shouldn't be this complicated. And it's really a detriment to our nation when it becomes so complicated that we can't engage. Um, yeah, so those are kind of like the big challenges here, the jargon, the digital divide, the way that outreach is happening. It excludes some populations from effectively engaging, and the information overload. We need somebody who's working on this, and we need to be able to help our children navigate this better.
Agreed. Yep. How people are being informed and how they respond.
We have trouble informing our public.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bing Bong agrees.
Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, everyone.